We love to celebrate when people are baptized because essentially what those individuals are saying is that they have made the decision to follow Jesus, and we just love that, and we're so thankful for that decision, and just want you to know that if you or someone you know is interested in making the decision to follow Jesus and even to be baptized, we would love to know about that. Right after every single service, you can just stop by our prayer tables right over here. They've got flowers on the tables, or also in the lobby, our next steps area out there. I'm always out there after the service. And would love for you to stop by either of those places and tell me or one of our team members that you're interested in taking that next step of being baptized. We'd love to have that conversation with you. Well, this is Veterans Day weekend, and so we wanted to take a moment to honor our veterans. If you're a veteran, would you please stand so that we can honor you? Thank you. Thank you guys so much for your service and for putting yourself in harm's way for our sakes. We are very, very thankful. Well, my name is Luke Davidson. I'm the campus pastor here at the North Richland Hills campus. And today we're continuing in a series called Crazy Like Us. And every single year as a church, we like to look back at the past year and see what we've done, and then also start to look at the future and say, hey, where are we going? And this campus hasn't even been here for a year yet. So it's been a big year as we look back over the past year. We launched in January, so coming in January will be our 1-year anniversary. I'm really looking forward to that. But it has been a fantastic year, and where we're going in the future, there's a lot of beautiful things. But we have been able, not just here at NRH, but across all of our campuses, we've been able to do incredible, crazy things over the past couple of years. I'm going to share a few of those with you here in just a moment, but we've been able to do some crazy things that we'll be able to continue doing in the future. And then also, I don't know if you knew this, maybe you yourself or the people sitting around you, I don't know if you knew that there are people right here in this room sitting around you that are crazy. They do some crazy stuff like, they do some crazy stuff like what are they thinking? Some of them give like a fraction of their income, maybe a 10%, over 10% maybe, they give to this church. Like, what are you doing? Like, why would you do that? Some of you are thinking 10% of my income. If I were to do that, you're throwing in the numbers in your head. I was like, I can't do this. Well, that would be crazy. Why in the world would you give over 10% to a church? And I'll tell you why they do it, because they're generous, and because when the bucket goes by, they're not responding and giving, like throwing a 20 in because they feel guilty and people are looking at me and I guess I got to throw something in there. No, they've actually planned and they've premeditated what they're going to give, and they've thought about it, and it's actually a part of what they do. And they actually really are cheerful and they celebrate. They love it. I guarantee if you go talk to those people and say, why in the world would you do that? They say, well, I love it. I was actually talking with one of our families this past week, who a very generous family, and they used the word giddy when they talked about describing why they love to give generously to this church. It was just a fun thing to talk about. And I hear those stories all the time. So this is a very generous church. But being generous is not natural. You have to be taught. It's something that you have to learn. And so that's why we focus on it every single year, because we don't want to drift away from that. We don't want to lose that, because there are literally orphans across the world who are counting on us. They're counting on you and your financial gifts. I'm just being honest with you. There are orphans around the world. There are mission agencies. There are organizations. They're doing all sorts of incredible stuff. And one of the huge blessings that we have contributed to the kingdom are financial gifts in a huge way. Not only across the world, though, but right here in DFW. There's a lot of organizations that really, really count on us. We give 5-6-figure gifts to them every single year. There are also right here in our church, we care about making sure that we have an excellent worship experience and that people are connecting with God. And we care about our kids and we care about our students. We don't want to lose that. We don't want to lose sight of that. And so we teach this and we focus on this. And so that's why for the next few weeks, we're going to continue teaching on how to be generous. Not just how to give, because, random acts of giving. Americans, we're really good at random acts of giving, and that's fantastic. I'm all for random acts of giving. But what we're talking about is not just giving and doing something. It's about being something. For it to become a part of who you are, to just be generous, that it's a part of how you think and how you pray and how you prepare, is to be generous. Most people are not generous. Now, the moment that you get told that you're not something, immediately you think of that one time that I did. You know, man, what's he talking about? I remember that time I did the thing, and that's what happens. But when we're talking about generosity, we're not just talking about a moment. We're talking about a lifestyle. Whenever we talk about generosity, it's more. Generosity is more than just random acts of giving. What happens is somebody throws out a situation, a need, and we sell it, right? And you get sold, and it's inspirational, and it's motivating, and it's guilting, but you get to the end, and you pull out your wallet, and there's that random, okay, I'll give to it, and you feel like you're guilted. But generosity is more than just random acts of giving. This series is more than just random acts of giving. I think we've got that slide. It's more than random acts of giving, and I'm all for it. But what we're talking about is generosity that transcends sort of the spontaneous thing. It transcends, generous people are not so much emotional in their giving as they are very practical and thought out and premeditated in the way that they give. Generous people aren't so much moved by guilt as much as they are by just the idea of, I've thought this through. I've calculated this is right. This is what God has called me to do. It's a totally different concept than most of us are used to. Now, I can feel the tension in the room. We're talking about money. Why we got to do this? Why did I invite my friend today? You know, you're thinking that way. But I just want you to think about this. Over the past 2 years, our church, we've been in this thing called Uncharted. And during Uncharted, it was this initiative. We raised almost $35 million in commitments, and we're almost at the end of that, and we're over $30 million towards. I mean, we're right on pace to hit that. It's fantastic. And because of that, I want you to see some of the things that our church has been able to do. This is just a few of the things that we've been able to do. Here's a list. In that time, we are now, Outreach Magazine just announced that we are the 75th fastest growing church in America, not just in our denomination, but all churches, all denominations. Isn't that awesome? 75th fastest growing. I'm excited to be a part of that. And think about all the money that goes towards growing something that fast, okay? But at the same time, we have eliminated or avoided $8 million in debt. At the same time that we're growing rapidly, at the same time, we gave our mission partners an additional $1 million in addition to what we already give them. And at the same time, we launched 2 new campuses that are running almost over 800 people every single weekend. That's crazy. That's crazy. And what I really want to point out is that you can't do this with random acts of giving. Like if we had taken one of these things and really pushed it and tried to motivate you and sell you, and every once in a while we do that. Right now, I tried to motivate you over the last few weeks to say, let's get a bunch of bags and let's fill them with Thanksgiving food. We've got a truck out there. We want to do that well, but you can't do all of this with just random acts of giving. There's not enough weeks to push stuff. There's not enough projects. There's not enough time. You can't do maybe one of these things. Like maybe we do one of these things and we spend a whole year saying, hey, we want to raise $8 million to eliminate debt. You can do one of them, but you can't do all of these. To do all of these takes very calculated, premeditated, thought out generosity from people all throughout this room. Our church is a very generous church. And that's what I love about what we've been able to do. But there's a big difference. We can't do all this with just random acts of giving. Generosity is more ordering your life around generosity. That's kind of ordering. It's not just a reaction to something. It's something that you really begin to structure your life around it. That idea isn't really natural to us. You see it in our culture, the desire to be generous, but it's not really natural to us. I'll tell you what's natural. What's natural is being crazy. That's how I feel sometimes when you see the way that Americans, the way that we use our money sometimes, the way I use my money. We do this thing. If you go look at financial trends, the way that we use our money in America, most Americans spend more money than we make. Say, how's that even possible? How did I do that? Why have I gotten myself in this situation? We spend more money than you make. How do you even do that? Well, we get into interest or financing and things like that. And some of that's really helpful, but every once in a while you get into a bind and now you're a prisoner. And now you're in a situation where this thing controls you and you are a slave to your debtor, or the person who has lended to you, your lender. And now they own you and you feel like, man, I'm a prisoner. We do this crazy thing in America. It's like the most normal thing. We don't even question it. But we made a little visual. What happens, we have this visual where time goes by and there's this moment in time. We've got a dollar sign that shows a moment of purchase, but we can't really afford the thing that we purchase. So what do? Immediately, we start paying more because of interest and financing necessarily. And sometimes that's good. I'm not trying to say that's all bad, but isn't it crazy that we so flippantly, without questioning it, start spending more? The moment that we buy it, the value just plummets. The moment that you drive it off the lot or you take it out of the store or you put it in your car, it's like, it's not worth it, but anything more. But I'm going to pay more for it over the next months or years for this thing that is tail diving, nose diving in value. Why do we do that? It's crazy. And yet it feels so normal to us. But sometimes we have to check and say, is that wise? Is that the best thing for me to habitualize my life around? And some people, we follow this over and over and over and over again. And you wonder why we get in such a place where money is just driving us crazy and we're so anxious and we're so worried. It's because we do this pattern over and over and over again. Crazy. Another thing that we do that is crazy in America, we don't feel, we're all about our feelings. I'm a feeler, right? We don't feel rich, but we are. And then we feel generous and we aren't. It's kind of crazy. And y'all are like, what do you mean, Luke? I'm not rich. No, listen, we don't feel rich, but we are. We feel generous, and oftentimes we aren't. And I just want you to think about this. If somebody from a third world country, I don't know if you've ever been, I hope you go to our mission trip, information meeting next Sunday, and I hope you go on a mission trip, and I hope you get to go see poverty. Because you'd be like, oh, I'm rich, congratulations to me. I'm super rich. I can help people out. Because you go to a slum or you'll go to a third world country. If an individual from a third world country were to come and just drop into your life and walk up to your house and be like, welcome to my home. And they'd be like, dang, you got bricks and wood and siding? My house is made out of mud. This is fantastic. And you'd be walking, well, thank you. You're very humble. And then they'd be like, what you got on the roof? And you'd be like, what do you mean? On the roof, what is that? And you'd be like, shingles? Shingles, that's awesome. And you'd be like, I've got a radiant barrier. A radiant barrier? I've got sticks and hay on my roof, straw. And then you take them inside and you're giving them a tour of your house. And you're like, hey, here's this bedroom. And what do you use this for? Oh, we don't really use this bedroom. You have you have a whole room in your house. I haven't even been in there in 6 months. You have a whole part of your house that you don't even go into. And then you keep touring around your house and you walk in and there's this compartment there. Like, what is that for? Oh, that's a shower. You haven't seen a shower? No, what is this thing? It's a shower. It's where I bathe. You have a place to take a bath in your house. I have to walk down to the river or to the pond and take a bath there. You've got it in your house. Not only that, but you've got this thing coming out of the wall, a shower head, that is spraying clean, drinkable water on your head, and you won't even drink it. I have to walk down to the river, get a bucket, bring it all the way back, boil it for 20 minutes, and then I can cook my food. You have clean, drinkable water spraying on you. You won't even drink it. It's only good enough for you to wash your body odor off with. Hey, babe, you are rich. You got it. Some of you, me, we have so much money you can't even fit it in all our pockets. So we have cargo pants and everything. You can't fit it in there. We have to build another house. It's called a bank to fit all of our money in, right? And you have a place, you go there and you get it out and you put it back in. So, and then you would take your friend that has come from a third world country, you guys would go out to eat a meal together and you would sit down and they'd be like, they would walk away and you just bought food that you're not even gonna eat. And you just walk away, you don't even box it up. You just leave it to sit there and go away, right? And they're like, man, you're rich. You just flowing, man. You just got it going on. And then rich people do this thing called upgrade, where you take a kitchen that has a refrigerator and an oven and a sink and countertops. And then rich people, you know what they do? They tear it all out and they replace it with a refrigerator and an oven and countertops and a stove. Don't we do this? Some of us, look at this picture. We spend more money on our kid's mom than we do on our engagement rings. You're rich, congratulations. So let's be good at it. Let's be good at it. So I've probably offended half of you. That's all right. It's better to be offended in church than to be bored, right? It's better to be offended. So what is generosity? If most of us are rich, listen, they did a study, I think it's Gallup poll, found that if your household makes $32,400 a year or above, you are in the top 1% of wage earners in the world. Congratulations. You're rich, most of us. So let's be good at it. So what are generosity myths? Here are several generosity myths. The first generosity myth is that generosity is spontaneous, and we kind of hit that a couple times today. Generosity is not so much just random acts of giving or being compelled by an inspiration or motivational pitch. It's more calculated and steady and thought out. And the idea there is if you have prepared, then you can be spontaneous. But if you haven't prepared, then when those moments come, you don't have enough money to be spontaneous. Another generosity myth is that generosity is determined by cash flow. Like, hey, when I get paid, I'll have enough money to be generous, but when I get to the end of the month or things are tight, then I don't have enough. And if your generosity is based on your cash flow, then you're probably not really set up as a generous person, because a generous person has built it in. It's consistent. It's a part of who they are, month to month or week to week or year to year. It's a part of their idea. Say, I've prepared for this. This is what I have. This is what I want to do. I'm excited about it. It's not an afterthought. It's a pre-thought. It's premeditated. Another generosity myth is that it's the amount that counts. Sometimes you see a little amount come through and, oh, that's not very generous. Or other times there's a ton of zeros and you go, oh, that's really generous. There's a big amount. Well, the only person who knows whether it's really generous is the person who wrote the check or who gave it. They're the only ones that know if they were actually planned and if it was something that was a sacrifice and something that was really generous for them, because it might not have been. They might have so much money, it was like, that's not a big deal for me. That's not a big thing. But this is a myth, because I know some people who give what we might think are a small amount, not a whole lot of zeros, and yet for them it's exceptionally generous. Something that we should all follow their example. That kind of leads to the final one here, which is that rich people are generous. This is not necessarily true. Rich people are rich. Generous people are generous. Can we just say that together out loud? Rich people are rich. Generous people are generous. Those two things don't necessarily go along with each other. I know some rich people who are very generous, and they are some of the best-hearted people I know. I also know rich people who are not very generous. And then I also know people who we would think are poor or lower income, and man, are they incredibly, incredibly generous. And they also are free, and they're joyful, and they're content, and that's just contagious. I mean, maybe you or someone you know has more money than the 4 rows in front of you and behind you combined, but they also have more worry and anxiety in their life than the four rows in front of you and behind. And yet I know people who don't have hardly anything, and yet very generous, not worried, very content, very loving, and God meets all their needs. It's incredible. It's inspiring. And that sort of happiness and joy is something that everybody can have. Rich people are rich. Generous people are generous. They don't necessarily go along to each other. And that's an important thing for you to know if you're kind of kicking off your career, 20s or 30s, or you're starting life, or you've thought about if you're a student and you're like, one day I'm going to do this, I'm going to make a lot of money. Then I'll be rich, you say in your mind. Right now, if things are too tight, I'm trying to take care of things, I'll build it in later, or it'll become a part of who I am. I'll get down my career, and then I'll be rich, and then I'll be generous. Not necessarily. Let me just predict, if you don't start building generosity into your life now, even as a student, even as a young professional, if you don't start building it now, let me just predict that when you get rich, you won't necessarily be generous, you'll just be rich. You have to focus. It has to be something that is very calculated and premeditated, something that you build in as a habit of your life now. So what is generosity? The generosity definition that we are working from is this. To be generous is the premeditated, which means that you have thought about this. It's not just impulsive, it's thought through, premeditated. This is a clunky definition. You're not going to remember it unless you write it down. The premeditated, what's the next word? Calculated? The premeditated, calculated, meaning that you have thought through the amount. You know, okay, I'm going to set aside this. This is what we are pulling generosity from. This is what we are going to give from. You've thought that through. The premeditated, calculated, designated, meaning that you even know where you want it to go. Maybe you've even planned that ahead of time, or at least you have a specific target. You're like, that's the target that I want to hit. So it's premeditated, calculated, designated. I feel like I'm rapping the Hamilton musical today. The premeditated, calculated, designated, emancipation, which means to set something free. And this is a great word, to set free. What are we setting free? Your personal financial assets. So the premeditated, calculated, designated emancipation of personal financial assets. Not just being generous with your time and your relationships, but being generous with your money. I'm being honest here. We're not trying to beat around the bush. This is important for us to be calculated, to think it through, and to set things free. And here's why. When you set it free, when you free your money, you free yourself from your money. And some of you are not free. You're totally a slave. You are a prisoner of money. And I know that you would like to be set free. If you come back next week, we're going to teach you how. And if you bring your kids, they're going to have more money to take care of you when you're in the nursing home. And you may have blown your finances, but we'll teach them and they can take care of you then. So we haven't talked about much Bible today. Next week, we're going to dive into the Bible a lot more, but I do want to look at one scripture today, Acts chapter 20, verse 35. And this is a phrase, don't throw it up there just yet. I know y'all saw it, but this is a phrase that all of you have heard. Even if you didn't grow up in church, you haven't been in church in a long time, I'm pretty sure you've heard this. You've probably said it, but you probably didn't know that it's in the Bible. You probably didn't know that Jesus said it, but he did. And it's powerful. To us, it's just a catchy phrase, but it is a very powerful thing to line your life around. And it's kind of the powerful idea that we're building through this series. So just to give you context, the book of Acts, there's the start of the New Testament. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are books about Jesus' life. And then Acts is a book about what happened after Jesus rose from the dead. And after that, people started going around telling people Jesus rose from the dead. And one of those guys was Paul. And he went around and said, Jesus rose from the dead. He started churches and said, hey, this has changed everything about who we are. It's changed our relationship with God. It's changed our relationship with each other. Paul was a great example of this. He was a very self-righteous religious person who did not associate with certain people, and there were certain layers within their temples, like you're not allowed to come here. And he started going into very diverse areas and saying, what Jesus has done is torn down the dividing walls, and now we are unified. People didn't like this. And so he started telling people what Jesus had done to break down all these different barriers and the way we should love and the way we should care about each other and this new grace and this new freedom and everything and this new life that Jesus had prepared for us. People wanted to kill Paul because of it. And at one point in his journey, he knew, all right, I have to go back to Jerusalem. He had this conviction from God. I have to go back to Jerusalem. And he knew that he was probably going to get arrested. And then down the road that he was probably going to be executed. And he knew he was never going to see his friends again, that he'd poured his life out to tell about Jesus and to change the world. And so before he gets on the boat to go to Jerusalem where the course of his life is going to change, he calls those friends together from the church of Ephesus, the leaders of that church, and they just have a really emotional moment where he's saying, listen, I may never see you again. And they're begging, and Paul, don't go, don't go, don't go. He's saying, I have to go. And he starts to lay out all the stuff that he did for them. He's saying, listen, don't forget this life that I lived for you. Don't forget the example that I modeled for you. And he's not bragging about himself. He's just saying, this is what Jesus has called us to. This is what's changed your lives and our communities and has given people hope and is totally overthrowing the order of this world. It's powerful. Don't lose sight of it. And as he's about to wrap up his speech and get on a boat to go and get arrested and then executed down the road, he says this word. He says this phrase right here, Acts chapter 20, verse 35. He says, remember the words of our Lord Jesus. It is more blessed to give than to receive. The words of our Lord Jesus, don't forget, it is more blessed to give than to receive. Now, we say this every once in a while. It's just a catchy phrase to us. You give a gift. Someone says, oh, thank you for the gift. And you say, I love giving. And they say, well, it's more blessed to give than to receive. Or blessed, depending on where you grew up in the South, right? It's more blessed. And for us, it's just kind of a catchy phrase that kind of passes us by. For Paul, he's literally getting on a ship. Goodbye, I'm going off to be imprisoned and executed. Remember, it is more blessed to give than to receive. It just feels like a weird context, doesn't it? It wasn't just a moment for them. It was this lifestyle. It's more blessed to give than to receive. For us, we just think of a moment, oh boy, man, I loved when I gave that. You remember that time that I did that? But what Paul's talking about here is saying this entire community, this entire world-altering movement is built around the idea of what Jesus, don't forget what he said, it's a bedrock. It's more blessed to give than to receive. The word blessed, if you go back to Greek and retranslate it, another way that you can translate this word is the word happy. You go look in any lexicon or any Greek dictionary, the word blessed will be probably first, and then second or third will be the word happy. There's an entire sermon that Jesus did called the Sermon on the Mount, where he goes through this thing called the Beatitudes. I don't have time to get into it today, but you should go check it out. Google Sermon on the Mount. Google Beatitudes. What is that? Go search it up. Jesus says repeatedly, blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are those who suffer and who are persecuted. And he's taking all these things that don't seem like they're blessed, and he's saying they're blessed. He's taking these people who shouldn't be happy, and he's saying they're happy because something's happened in their soul and in their mind where they are at peace, and they have a reward in the kingdom of heaven throughout eternity. And so they're happy, they're joyful, they're powerful, they're strong. They're who you want to be, is what Jesus is saying. And that's what he's saying here. It is more happy to give than to receive. Isn't that something that you want? Some of you live a life that's not very happy. Some of you live a life that you're a prisoner and things are really morbid in your heart and your mind. But Jesus is saying happy is the person whose life is ordered around giving rather than receiving. Happier. Not just about a moment or a transaction, but around a life that is ordered around being generous. He's talking about something new and foundational, something that was huge for his people. Now, if you really think about all of the things that we're talking about today, and maybe you're like, Luke, I'm just not interested. You know, how long is this series? Because I'll be back. And you're trying to be subtle, you're trying to be kind, but, you know, I got a few text messages this week. Well, you know, what are we talking about this Sunday? You know, I will invite my friend back in 3 weeks, you know, something like that. And I get it. I just want you to know that I'm not trying to get you to give to something or take something from you. I'm not trying to. If we were, there'd be somebody up here with a microphone and pictures of little kids, and we'd have the song play. Will you remember me? And your heart, you'd be crying, and you know, oh, I gotta give, and you would pull out your wallet. People know how to sell you stuff. We're really good, and that's part of the problem, isn't it? Some of us are so exhausted because you get sold. You get numb to it. You're like, I just don't care. And I feel bad, and now I feel guilt, and the whole thing is difficult. You know, one day, I think it was 2 years ago, we had Chick-fil-A was giving away hundreds of sandwich cards, free sandwich cards. And we had hundreds more than we could give away, and they expired in like 3 days. I was like, well, I can eat a bunch of Chick-fil-A sandwiches, but I can't eat hundreds of them. So I tried to pass those out. I had no catch. I was just trying to give people a free sandwich card, and they would not accept it. There was no, I don't, what's the catch? You know, they're pulling back. We get so exhausted with people trying to manipulate and sell us and move us that you just get tired. It's exhausting. That's why some of you don't even enjoy giving anymore. And I'm just saying, you owe it to yourself to come back for the next couple weeks, because this may be the one time in your life where we teach you not how to give, how to say no to giving maybe. You know, sometimes a generous person, they are so calculated and aware that something comes along and they don't even feel guilty. They say, no, that's not what I've premeditated. That's not what I've calculated for. That's not what I've designated. This may be the one time where a church teaches you not how to give, but how to be generous. That's a different thing. And that's a life that Jesus said is happier. So I want to do one final thing, if you'll bear with me. And then if you come back next week, and we'll just bring your kids, and I'll teach them, and you'll be happy. You'll write us notes from the nursing home. Thank you for teaching my kids how to be generous. Okay. But one more thing before we close out. I just want you to imagine for a moment. So let's just imagine that suddenly, I know this can't happen. Let's just imagine that you have a bank account full of money, and some of you are like, dang, that would be fantastic. But let's imagine specifically that you have a bank account full of all the money that you wasted over the last 5 or 10 years. It's just suddenly there. I didn't tell you what you wasted. You told yourself that, by the way. But you have this bank account full of what you wasted over the last 5 or 10 years, and maybe you felt guilty about it. It's like, man, I shouldn't have done that, or I didn't need that car, or the couch was fine, or, you know, so many shoes. Just all the money you've wasted. I don't want to say too much because I don't want you to feel like I'm just saying, you define what's in that bank account. And suddenly you've just got maybe hundreds of dollars or thousands or tens of thousands of dollars in this bank account. And here's the catch, though. You can't use it on yourself. You have to give it away over the next year. Wouldn't that be fun? Like suddenly the thing that you felt guilty about and has been a burden, now you've got this way to redeem it. And it's like, you know what? This is fun and I can't use it on myself. I have to use it for others. And you hear about the need down the street. Somebody's trying to raise $800 and you're like, oh, here's $900. Or the school is trying to raise money for something and you're writing checks and they're like, you're rich. And you're like, no, I've just got this bank account that's full of money. I can't use it on myself, but I can give it to others. And you would start to experience, I think, you wouldn't feel regret. You wouldn't be possessive of it, but you'd be wise and prudent and thoughtful. You'd be calculated and you think, I want this to be used in such a good way. I think you might experience the joy of giving for maybe the first time in your life. And our question is, why not just do that going forward? Because we're going to teach you how over the next couple weeks. And you've already done it before, and the stuff that you feel like you've wasted and you feel guilty about, I mean, you've done that in the past. Let's just change that going forward. Let's make it different for the next 5 or 10 years. And let's learn to be generous. I think it's the most powerful thing in the world and one of the most powerful gifts that the American church has to offer the world. We've got a lot of things that if we were premeditated and calculated, you wouldn't be able to stop us. Nothing would be able to stop us. And here's our promise. Our promise is that when you become generous, you will give more, save more, and consume less. I know that sounds crazy. Now, the exception to this is there might be some of you in the room and you've saved up so much or you've got so much coming your way that you're not going to save more. You're borderline hoarding money, but you will, if you get this into your life, you will give more and you'll consume less. But most of us, you'll also, if you become generous, you'll also save more. And plus, Jesus said you'll be happier, blessed. It's happier to give, to orient your life around giving rather than receiving. I was sitting with our staff this past week. We were just talking about fun stories of generosity. And our children's pastor, Selah, who Nate Massey, who's doing our hosting today, he'll be up here in a moment to close out the service. It's his wife. She's awesome. Selah told us that when she was in high school, that her parents started to save up money to buy a van to replace their old car. And they were doing a really, really great job, just saving it up, being calculated with it. And at the same time, they had a friend whose car died and they took it to the shop. It could not be fixed. And so it's a huge financial bind for them because it's not even like they could, spend several hundred to get it going. The car was done. So the car is worthless and they have nothing to recover the expenses to try to invest in another car. They were just totally out. And so the family is like walking to get to where they needed to go or hitching rides to get from point A to point B. Meanwhile, Selah's parents had saved up the money, bought their van, and they had their old car sitting there, which they could have sold off or traded to recover the money that they had saved up and somehow invested it in the future. But they were free of it. They didn't know anything on it. And it was all free from them. They could use it however they wanted. And so they decided to give that car to their friends, no strings attached. Just gave them a car. Isn't that crazy? Isn't that beautiful? And you say, am I bragging about that? No, I'm just saying what a great example of somebody who was premeditated and calculated and then had the ability and the freedom to give. I think that's a great picture of generosity. It's exactly what Paul was telling us in Acts chapter 20, verse 35. He said, follow my example. I've been an example of how you can help those in need by working hard. And you should remember the words of our Lord Jesus. It's more blessed to give than to receive. He's daring us to become generous. Daring us. He's saying it's awesome. And you think giving away cars sounds crazy. Jesus says not being generous is crazy. So don't mess next week because we're going to look at Jesus. He's going to say to live any other way other than generosity. Those would be crazy ways to live. Those are people living without a clue in la la land. But the person, the man, the woman, the student, the single mother who orders your life around generosity, those are the people that are living with their eyes wide open and are paying attention. So you can choose your crazy. We're crazy. The American way is crazy. Choose your crazy. But before you do, you owe it to yourself to be here next week to hear part 3 of Crazy Like Us. Thank you guys so much.